The message was sent to the wrong number, but it found the only man dangerous enough to answer it. Evan Miller's hands were shaking so badly that the cracked screen of his phone blurred beneath his thumb. Snow drifted through the yellow light of Whitmore Park, soft and beautiful from a distance, cruel when it melted through the seams of his coat. He sat on a metal bench beneath the old bus shelter, one arm wrapped around Noah, the other holding Liam against his chest, trying to make his body into a wall between his sons and the cold. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees, and the wind moved through the empty playground like something alive. Noah was 5 years old and trying too hard to be brave. He had stopped complaining 10 minutes ago, which scared Evan more than crying would have. Liam's cheeks were red, his small fingers tucked under Evan's sweater, his breathing shallow from another cough he was trying to hide. Evan opened the shelter website again, the one a nurse at a free clinic had written down for him, and typed with numb fingers, "Please. I have 2 children. We are freezing. We do not need much. Just somewhere warm until morning." His phone showed 3% battery. He added one more line because panic made honesty easier than pride. Noah is coughing again. Liam says he cannot feel his fingers. Then he pressed send. Across the city, inside a private room above a closed Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago, Damian Cole's phone lit up on the polished table between silent men in black suits. It was not his business phone. It was not his family phone. It was the number only used when someone was desperate, dying, or foolish enough to reach the head of the Cole syndicate directly. Damian almost ignored it. Then he read the names Noah and Liam, and for the first time in 5 years, the cold inside him cracked. Damian left the room without explaining himself. No one asked where he was going, because men like Damian Cole did not owe explanations, and because the look on his face had turned the air around him silent. Within minutes, a black armored Escalade rolled through the frozen streets of Chicago, its tires hissing over salted asphalt while the city blurred past in streaks of gold, gray, and white. Damian sat in the back seat with the phone in his gloved hand, staring at the location Marco had traced from the message. Whitmore Park. 5 miles away. A place for families in daylight, for ghosts after midnight. He told himself it could be anyone. A scared parent. 2 unlucky children. A coincidence with names that meant nothing. But his chest knew better before his mind would admit it. Noah. Liam. The names had hooked into something buried so deep he had mistaken it for scar tissue. When the Escalade stopped beside the park, Damian stepped out into the snow, the cold biting clean through the collar of his coat. The playground stood empty, swings moving gently in the wind though no child sat on them. Then he saw the bus shelter. A small shape huddled beneath it. No, 3 shapes. An Omega with dark blonde hair falling over his face, arms wrapped around 2 little boys as if his bones were the last roof they had left. Damian's breath stopped. Evan Miller. 5 years had changed him, thinned him, sharpened the soft lines Damian remembered, but it had not erased him. Nothing could have erased him. Then one of the boys lifted his head. Silver-gray eyes looked across the snow, solemn and watchful, eyes Damian had seen every morning in his own mirror. The second boy pressed closer to Evan, wearing the same stubborn frown Damian's mother used to say had been born on his face. Marco whispered something behind him, but Damian did not hear it. The past was standing 20 feet away, freezing in the dark, and it had his eyes. Evan saw Damian 1 second after Noah did, and the world narrowed until there was nothing left but the man standing in the snow. For a moment, Evan forgot the cold. He forgot the empty shelter request, the dead battery, the ache in his back, the hunger he had been pretending not to feel so the boys would not worry. All he could see was the alpha he had once loved with a softness that had ruined him. Damian Cole looked exactly like the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid, tall and still in a black overcoat, his expression carved from winter, his gray eyes fixed on Evan as if 5 years had folded into 5 seconds. Evan moved before he thought. He pulled Noah and Liam behind him, forcing his tired body upright, even though his knees shook. "Stay back," he said, but his voice came out rough and thin. Damien stopped immediately. That was what frightened Evan most. The old Damien would have taken control of the space, issued an order, decided what happened next before anyone else could breathe. This Damien stood 20 feet away and looked at him like he had found something sacred in the snow and did not know whether he had the right to touch it. Liam peeked around Evan's coat, his small face pale beneath the park lights. Noah held tighter to Evan's sleeve, studying Damien with the solemn suspicion of a child who had learned too early that adults could disappear. "Daddy Evan," Noah whispered, loud enough for the wind to carry it, "is he a bad alpha?" Damien flinched. It was small, almost invisible, but Evan saw it because once he had known every crack in that man's armor. Evan wanted to lie. He wanted to say yes, because yes would be easier than explaining the truth. Instead, his throat closed. Damien lowered his gaze to the boys, then back to Evan. "I got your message," he said quietly. Evan's phone went dark in his hand, the battery finally gone, and somehow that tiny black screen felt like the last door closing. Damien had known powerful men who needed laboratories, lawyers, and blood tests before they accepted the truth in front of them. He needed none of that. The proof stood in the snow with red cheeks and trembling hands, half hidden behind the Omega who had once been his whole world. Noah watched him with gray eyes too old for a 5-year-old child, eyes that carried the cold stillness like an inheritance. Liam was softer, smaller, his lashes wet from the cold, but when he frowned at Damien from behind Evan's coat, the expression was so painfully familiar that Damien felt something inside him give way. His alpha instincts recognized them before his mind found language. Not ownership. Not claim. Something older and quieter. A pull toward two small lives that should never have been shivering under a bus shelter while he sat above the city surrounded by heat, guards, and untouched food. Liam coughed again, a thin sound that made Evan tighten his arms around both boys. Damien took one step forward, then stopped when Evan's shoulders locked. "I said stay back," Evan warned, and this time there was steel beneath the exhaustion. Damien raised both hands slowly, palms open, letting the snow collect on his leather gloves. "I heard you." Noah looked from Damien's hands to his face. "Are you the person from the shelter?" he asked. Damien swallowed. The honest answer was no. The safer answer was yes. "Instead," he said, "I am someone who can get you warm." Evan gave a bitter, broken laugh. "Warmth from you always came with a locked door." The word struck clean. Damien did not defend himself. He looked at the boys again, at Liam's blue lips and Noah's brave little chin, and every question he had carried for 5 years burned down to one. "Evan," he said, his voice lower now, almost unsteady, "how long have they been mine?" Evan went completely still, as if Damien's question had frozen the air harder than the Chicago winter ever could. For 5 years, he had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. Sometimes he screamed. Sometimes he walked away. Sometimes Damien begged. But none of those imagined endings had included Noah shivering against his left side, Liam coughing against his right, or a white van rolling slowly along the curb with the words Lakeside Family Outreach printed crookedly across its door. Evan saw it and relief almost broke him. "That is them," he whispered, clutching the boys closer. "That is the shelter." Damien's eyes shifted toward the van, and the softness vanished from his face. He did not move quickly. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked, and the park seemed to hold its breath. 2 people stepped out wearing navy coats and laminated badges. One smiled too widely. The other kept one hand inside his pocket, though the night was not cold enough for that kind of stillness. Marco appeared beside Damien, quiet as a shadow. "Boss," he murmured, "that logo is wrong." Evan's stomach dropped. Damien had already noticed. The badge font was off. The van had no county plates. The woman's shoes were not winter boots but black tactical soles dusted with salt. Most people would have missed it. Damien Cole had survived by noticing everything. "Evan," he said softly, never taking his eyes off the strangers, "do not let them touch the boys." The woman lifted a clipboard. "Mr. Miller. We received your shelter request." Noah pressed closer to Evan. Liam whispered, "Daddy Evan, I do not like them." That was enough. Evan stepped back. The strangers stepped forward. Damien moved between them without hurry, a wall of black wool and silent authority. "This family is no longer waiting for assistance," he said. The woman's smile twitched. Damien's voice dropped colder than the snow. "Leave now." The two strangers did not leave at first, and that was their mistake. Not because Damien raised a hand, and not because anyone needed to see what kind of power followed his name through Chicago, but because the silence around him changed. Marco stepped slightly to the right. Another black vehicle eased to the curb without a sound. The woman with the clipboard looked past Damien, saw the men waiting beside the Escalade, and finally understood that this was no frightened Omega alone in a park anymore. Damien did not look at her again. He turned his back on the fake shelter van as if it had already stopped mattering, then lowered himself slowly to one knee in the snow. Evan stared at him, stunned. Damien Cole, the man who had made senators return calls before breakfast, the man whose name closed rooms and opened locked doors, knelt in front of two 5-year-old boys as if the frozen ground deserved more respect than their fear. He removed his gloves and placed them beside him, showing empty hands. "My name is Damien," he said, his voice quiet enough that only the children and Evan could hear. "I am not here to take you from your father. I am not here to scare you. I am here because your message found me." Noah's lower lip trembled, but he did not cry. "You know Daddy Evan?" Damien looked at Evan, and for 1 second all the distance between them filled with the ghost of a home that had burned without fire. "Yes," he answered. "A long time ago, your father was the bravest person I knew." Evan's eyes shone, but his face stayed guarded. Liam took one tiny step forward, drawn by warmth, by instinct, by something no child his age could name. Damien did not reach for him. He only opened his coat and let the heat escape into the cold. "You can hate me later," he said to Evan softly. "But let me get them warm now." Evan wanted to refuse him. Pride rose first, sharp and familiar, because pride was what had kept him standing through eviction notices, unpaid clinic bills, and nights when dinner meant dividing one peanut butter sandwich into 3 uneven pieces. But then Liam coughed again, small and tired against his sleeve, and Noah's hand felt like ice inside his own. Evan looked at Damien kneeling in the snow, then at the warm black Escalade waiting by the curb, and hated how simple survival could make a choice. "Only until morning," Evan said. Damien nodded once, as if Evan had handed him a contract more sacred than any oath in his world. "Only until morning," he repeated. Marco opened the rear door, and heat spilled out in a golden wave. Noah climbed in first, wary but too cold to pretend he was not relieved. Liam hesitated, then Evan lifted him into the seat, tucking the blanket Marco offered around both boys. Damien stayed outside until Evan got in, giving him the space to choose rather than be moved. Through the tinted window, Evan saw the fake shelter van reverse away from the curb. No shouting. No chase. Just its headlights shrinking into the storm while Damien stood under the park lamp, speaking quietly into his phone. Evan could not hear the words, only see the stillness of his face. When Damien finally entered the vehicle, the air changed. Noah watched him from beneath the blanket. Liam, half asleep already, mumbled, "Are we going home?" Evan's heart twisted. They did not have one. Damien looked at Evan before answering, careful, almost gentle. "You are going somewhere warm." The Escalade pulled away from Whitmore Park, leaving behind the bench, the snow, and the dead phone in Evan's pocket. For the first time that night, the boys stopped shaking. For the first time in 5 years, Evan was close enough to Damien to remember how safe had once felt, and how dangerous it was to miss it. The penthouse rose above the Chicago River like a glass cliff, all steel, marble, and silence. Evan remembered it from another life, back when its height had felt like protection and not a warning. The private elevator opened directly into the living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city glittering beneath the snow. Noah and Liam stared with wide eyes, too tired to be impressed for long. A pediatric doctor was already waiting near the fireplace with a black medical bag, a soft voice, and warm hands. Evan stayed beside the boys through every gentle check, answering questions about the cough, the cold, the missed meals, the night they had spent at a 24-hour laundromat before the park. Damien stood several feet away the entire time, still in his snow-damp coat, looking like a man who had been locked outside his own life. He did not interrupt. He did not command. He only listened, and with every answer Evan gave, his face became quieter. When the doctor said the boys needed warmth, rest, food, and monitoring, Damien sent Marco away with one look. 10 minutes later, the kitchen filled with the smell of soup, toasted bread, and hot chocolate. Liam fell asleep on the sofa with both hands around a mug he was too drowsy to drink from. Noah fought sleep longer, his gray eyes fixed on Damien. "Do you live here alone?" he asked. Damien glanced at Evan before answering. "Yes." Noah frowned. "That is sad." Evan closed his eyes, because children had a terrible gift for saying what adults buried. Damien crossed the room slowly, stopped at the edge of the rug, and placed a folded blanket within Noah's reach without stepping closer. Noah touched the blanket, then looked up at him. "Are you our dad?" The fire cracked softly. Evan's breath caught. Damien's hand went still, suspended in the warm light, and for once the most feared alpha in Chicago had no answer at all. Noah's question stayed in the room long after his voice faded, small and impossible, hovering between the fireplace and the falling snow beyond the glass. Evan reached for him, but Noah was already asleep, exhaustion finally pulling him under before anyone could answer. Liam slept beside him, his cheek pressed into the blanket Damien had given him, both boys safe for the first time in days. Evan stood slowly. "Do not make promises to them," he said, his voice quiet enough not to wake them. Damien looked at him across the warm room. "I will not lie to them." Evan's smile was tired and painful. "You lied to me by silence. That was always your cleanest weapon." Damien absorbed the words without flinching, because he deserved them, and because the truth had finally begun to move beneath the floor of his memory. Later, when Evan followed the doctor into the guest room with the boys, Damien went to his private office and opened files that had been sealed for 5 years. Messages he had never received. Security footage with missing timestamps. A relocation order bearing his signature, except the angle of the D was wrong, the pressure too light, the ink from a pen he had never used. Then Marco placed an old report on his desk, and Damien saw the name of the man who had stood beside him the night Evan vanished. Victor Hale. His most trusted advisor. The man who had told him Evan left willingly. The man who had buried every attempt Evan made to reach him. Damien stood outside the guest room door as dawn turned the windows pale blue. Inside, Evan hummed softly to the twins, the same lullaby Damien remembered from a life he thought was dead. "I did not abandon you," he whispered. From the other side of the door, Evan answered, "But you believed I could." Damien's phone buzzed. A photograph appeared on the screen, taken in the park hours earlier, showing Evan and the twins beneath the shelter. Under the picture, one message waited like a knife laid flat on glass. "The heirs are real. Thank you for confirming it." Damien stared at the words until the hallway around him seemed to narrow. Someone had not only watched them in the park. Someone had known what to watch for. Someone had been waiting for Damien to reveal the truth with his own reaction. His first instinct was to walk into the guest room, lock the door, and place himself between Evan, the children, and the entire city. But Evan had already spent 5 years trapped by decisions powerful men made without asking him. Damien would not make the first choice of this new life another cage. He turned away from the door and called Marco. His voice was so quiet that even the guards at the end of the hall straightened. Move the decoy teams now. No one connected to the restaurant, the tower, or the old estate comes within 10 blocks of this building. I want the van from the park traced, the photographer identified, and every shelter request sent tonight pulled through a clean channel. Marco did not ask why. He had seen Damien angry before. This was worse. Anger had heat. This had none. Within 30 minutes, the penthouse changed without changing shape. The windows still showed the Chicago River turning black under the snow. The fireplace still burned low in the living room. The boys still slept in the guest room with their cheeks warm and their small hands curled into the blankets. But beneath that calm, an invisible machinery began moving. Elevators were locked. Cameras were redirected. Cars entered and left the underground garage in carefully timed patterns, carrying coats, bags, and decoys that looked enough like Evan and the children to mislead anyone watching from across the street. Just before sunrise, Damien knocked on the guest room door. Evan opened it only a few inches, his hair mussed from lying beside the boys, his eyes sharp with exhaustion. He looked younger in the half-light and older than Damien could bear. What happened? Evan asked. Damien did not lie. He turned the phone toward him. Evan read the message. All the color drained from his face. They saw us. Yes. The van? Possibly. Or someone behind the van. Evan's hand tightened around the edge of the door. You told me we were safe here. Damien accepted the accusation because he had earned worse. You were warm here. Safe is something I am still building. Evan's mouth trembled with a bitter answer he did not release. Behind him, Noah stirred, mumbling in his sleep. Liam coughed once, softer than before but enough to make Evan turn instinctively. Damien lowered his voice. I need to move you before the city wakes up. Not to one of my visible properties. Not somewhere my enemies expect. A safe house north of the city. Medical staff will follow. You can ride with the boys. I will not separate you from them. Evan looked at him for a long moment. 5 years ago, Damien's certainty had felt like shelter. Now it felt like a dangerous weather system, something too large to trust and too powerful to ignore. Do I get to say no? Damien's answer came at once. Yes. The word seemed to surprise both of them. Evan searched his face, waiting for the command beneath the permission. It did not come. Damien only stood there in the hallway with the phone in his hand and devastation in his eyes, giving Evan the one thing he had failed to give him before. A choice. Evan looked back at the sleeping twins. Noah had one arm flung protectively across Liam's blanket, as if even in dreams he remembered he was the older brother by 6 minutes and had duties to fulfill. Evan's throat tightened. Pride had kept them alive for 5 years, but pride would not stop the next fake shelter van. Fine, he whispered. But I sit with them. I keep their documents. And no one touches them without asking me first. Damien nodded as if Evan had just rewritten the laws of his entire world. Done. By the time the sky turned the color of steel, they were on the road. Evan sat in the back seat between the twins, one arm around each child. Noah watched the city disappear through the tinted window, silent and too awake. Liam slept against Evan's side, his small hand closed around the sleeve of Damien's borrowed sweater. Evan had hated taking it. Marco had left clean clothes outside the bathroom because Evan's coat was soaked through from snow and old shelter heat, and Evan had chosen the largest sweater only because it covered both fear and cold. It smelled faintly of cedar, clean laundry, and Damien. That was the worst part. Memory could be cruel in gentle ways. Damien sat in the front passenger seat instead of beside them, giving Evan space even while every line of his body leaned backward toward the children. No one spoke until Noah asked, "Daddy Evan, are we running again?" The question entered the car like a blade. Evan closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them because his sons watched everything. We are moving somewhere safer. Noah looked at Damien's reflection in the mirror. Because of the bad shelter people. Damien answered before Evan had to. Because someone pretended to help when they meant to scare you. That was wrong. I am going to make sure they cannot do it again. Noah considered this with the solemn seriousness of a child who had seen too much. Are you a police officer? Marco made a small sound in the driver's seat that might have been a cough. Damien did not smile. No, are you a bad guy? Evan's heart stopped for the second time that morning. Damien looked at Noah in the mirror. I have done bad things in my life. Noah did not blink. But are you bad to kids? Damien's voice changed. It became quiet in a way Evan had never heard before. Never. Noah seemed to accept that for the moment. He leaned into Evan and whispered, he talks like Winter. Evan almost laughed. It hurt too much, so he only kissed Noah's hair. The safe house was not a house so much as a hidden world behind bare trees and a long private road dusted in snow. It sat near a frozen lake, low and wide, with stone walls, warm windows, and no visible luxury from the outside. Inside, it smelled of pine wood, clean sheets, and soup already warming on the stove. There were guards beyond the property line, but none crowded the doorway. There were cameras, but none pointed toward the children's room. There were locks, but Evan was given the codes. That detail nearly undid him. Damien handed him a small card with the numbers written in black ink. Every door you need opens with this. The east hallway leads to the children's room. The kitchen is stocked. The doctor will come in 1 hour. The lakeside windows are secure glass. The guest suite has its own exit. If you ever feel trapped, you use it. Evan stared at the card. You think codes make this different? No, Damien said. I think control starts with small things. You should have had more of it. Evan had no answer for that. He hated that Damien sounded like a man who had been learning grief in the last few hours and hated more that the lesson seemed to be working. The boys explored slowly. Liam found a basket of wooden blocks near the fireplace. Noah found a shelf of children's books and pulled out one about a bear who lost his hat. Evan watched them touch ordinary things as if they had forgotten the world could contain softness. He looked away before Damien could see his eyes. But Damien saw anyway. He saw everything now, too late and all at once. The pediatric doctor arrived again an hour later, this time with a nurse carrying a small cooler of medicine and a cloth bag full of child-sized socks. Evan almost cried over the socks, which made him angry because socks should not have been enough to break him. The doctor checked Liam's cough, listened to Noah's breathing, examined both boys' hands and feet, and said the cold had been frightening but not irreversible. Liam needed rest, fluids, warm meals, and monitoring. Noah needed the same, though the doctor added that brave children often needed permission to stop being brave. Noah pretended not to understand that sentence. Evan understood it too well. When the doctor left, Damien stood in the hall with the medical report in his hand, reading every word as if it were a confession written against him. Evan passed him without speaking and went into the kitchen to cut toast into triangles because Liam had once decided squares tasted more tired. Damien followed only as far as the doorway. He did not cross it until Evan looked up. "May I come in?" he asked. Evan's knife paused. The question was small. It should not have mattered. But it did. "You own the house," Evan said. "That was not what I asked." Evan looked at him for a long second, then turned back to the toast. "Fine." Damien entered the kitchen like a man entering sacred ground. Noah sat at the table with a blanket around his shoulders, watching him with quiet suspicion. Liam was half asleep in his chair, his cheek nearly touching his bowl. Damien saw the way Evan's hand hovered near Liam's back without waking him and stored that detail like a law. These children were not to be startled. Evan was not to be crowded. Love, if he was ever allowed near it again, would have to become patient or it would become another kind of harm. Marco arrived 2 hours later with a leather folder, a laptop, and the expression of a man carrying a bomb made of paper. Damien did not open the folder in front of the children. He waited until Noah and Liam were eating scrambled eggs at the kitchen island, both wrapped in fleece blankets, both guarded by a grandmotherly nurse who had worked for the Cole family before Damien was born and was not afraid of anyone alive. Only then did Damien lead Evan into the study. Evan stayed near the door. Damien noticed but did not comment. Marco placed the folder on the desk. The shelter website was copied 3 weeks ago. Same layout, one letter different in the address. It scraped requests from families who thought they were contacting a real nonprofit. Most were redirected. Evan's message bounced because his phone autofilled the wrong emergency contact number from an old clinic resource sheet. That is how it reached you. Evan's stomach turned. So the shelter never got my request. The real shelter did not, Marco said gently. But the fake site did. Damien opened the first file. A photograph of the van appeared on the laptop screen. The crooked Lakeside Family Outreach logo. The wrong badge font. The black tactical soles dusted with salt. Beneath it was a purchase record from a shell company. Then another shell company. Then a name Evan remembered only because Damien had said it like a curse in the hallway. Victor Hale. Damien's most trusted advisor. Evan stared at the name. He sent them. Yes, Marco said. The van was his last insurance policy. It was not meant to help you. It was meant to collect the boys before Damien could confirm who they were. Evan gripped the back of a chair so hard his fingers ached. For one bright, terrible second, he saw the park again. The woman's wide smile. The clipboard. Noah's hand in his sleeve. Liam whispering that he did not like them. Damien standing between them and the van. Evan had thought pride made him refuse help. Now he understood how close pride had come to handing his children to the wrong people. Damien moved as if he wanted to touch him, then stopped himself halfway. That restraint did more damage than touch would have. There is more, Marco said. Damien's face closed. Show me. The next file was a hospital discharge record from 5 years ago, signed during the week Evan had disappeared from Damien's life. The signature at the bottom was Evan's name, but the letters were wrong. The next page was a private relocation agreement claiming Evan had accepted payment to leave the city and cut all contact. The bank account listed beneath it had never belonged to him. Evan felt the room tilt. He remembered those days differently. A small rented room. Morning sickness he had not yet understood. Calls that went unanswered. A message sent to Damien's office, begging him to meet. A nurse at a clinic telling him stress was dangerous. A man in a gray suit appearing outside the clinic 2 days later to tell him Damien did not want scandal. Evan had been 23, frightened, proud, and newly pregnant with children he could not yet imagine as faces. He had believed the silence because heartbreak always looks like proof when you are alone. Damien read the forged letter without breathing. It was written in Evan's name, cold and final, claiming he had used Damien, regretted the relationship, and wanted money more than memory. At the bottom was Damien's own seal. His private seal. The one only 3 people had access to. Damien looked up. Victor. Marco nodded once. And Dr. Ellis. Victor paid him to tell you Evan had terminated contact voluntarily and left the state with another alpha. The payment trail is buried, but not well enough. Your legal team has everything. Evan's voice came out thin. You believe that? Damien's eyes lifted to him. The answer was there before he spoke. Shame. Regret. The kind of wound no apology could make noble. Yes. Evan laughed once, broken and airless. You believed I could write that? Damien did not defend himself. I believed the worst thing because it punished me less than looking for the truth. Silence settled between them. Evan wanted to hate him cleanly. He had lived on that hatred during nights when the boys were hungry and he had nothing left to sell. But hatred was easier when the villain was simple. Damien was not simple. He was guilty, yes. Proud, yes. Blind, yes. But he had also knelt in the snow and kept his hands open. He had given Evan door codes. He had not touched the boys without permission. That did not erase 5 years. It made the next 5 minutes harder. Marco slid another page forward. There is a pattern. Victor did not only hide Evan. He created a policy around him. Anyone who contacted the private number without clearance was rerouted to his office. Any mention of pregnancy, children, or bloodline risk was flagged. He built an entire wall around you, Damien, and made it look like efficiency. Damien's jaw tightened. How many? Marco hesitated. 8 emergency requests over 5 years were suppressed. None appear to involve Evan until last night. But he was testing the system. He wanted to control what reached you. Evan looked from Marco to Damien. So the number I reached was never supposed to reach you? Not anymore, Marco said. The message slipped through because your phone sent it with an old clinic template that bypassed the new filter. Evan sank into the nearest chair. His knees had decided without consulting him. So my mistake saved us. Damien's voice was almost a whisper. No. Your desperation did. The mistake only found the door. Evan pressed both hands over his face. He had spent so long being ashamed of that message, ashamed of begging, ashamed of the words please and we are freezing, as if poverty were a confession of failure instead of evidence of survival. Now he understood the message had been the first thing strong enough to break through the prison built around them. What happens now? Evan asked. Damien closed the folder. Now Victor thinks he has time to move his accounts and disappear. He does not. Before revenge, there was one more wound to open. Damien sent Marco to retrieve Dr. Ellis, the clinic physician Victor had paid 5 years ago. He expected resistance. He expected delay. Instead, Dr. Ellis arrived at the safe house 2 hours later with gray skin, shaking hands, and the terrified obedience of a man who had carried guilt too long and was almost relieved to see punishment wearing a human face. Evan stood in the study when the doctor entered. He remembered him immediately. The soft brown coat. The careful voice. The way he had looked at Evan's stomach instead of his eyes. You, Evan said. The doctor swallowed. Mr. Miller. Damien stood behind the desk, still as a statue carved from judgment. You will tell him the truth. Dr. Ellis did not look at Damien. He looked at Evan, and that was worse. Victor Hale came to me after your second clinic visit. He knew you were pregnant before you had decided what to do. He said Damien Cole was dangerous for you. He said if you stayed, you and the children would become leverage in a war. He said the best thing I could do was guide you away. Evan's voice was flat. You mean lie to me? The doctor closed his eyes. Yes. You told me Damien had received my messages. I did. You told me he chose silence. Yes. You told me if I came near him again, his people would remove me. Dr. Ellis flinched. Yes. The room seemed to tilt around Evan. He had remembered those sentences for 5 years. They had become the bitter architecture of his life. Now the man who had spoken them stood in front of him and made them small, made them bought, made them something that could have been prevented by one honest person. Damien looked like he wanted to tear the world apart and had nowhere safe to put his hands. Evan stepped closer to the doctor. I was scared. Dr. Ellis nodded, tears shining in his eyes. I know. No, you do not. You saw a frightened Omega with no power and decided my fear was useful. The doctor said nothing. Evan's voice did not rise. That made it more devastating. I had twins alone because of you. I learned to time fevers by touch because I could not afford urgent care. I skipped meals so they could drink milk. I slept in laundry rooms and bus stations and told them we were on adventures. I carried the story you gave me like a stone in my chest. And all this time, it was not truth. It was someone else's convenience. Dr. Ellis bowed his head. I am sorry. Evan stared at him for a long moment. Your apology cannot feed a child 5 years ago. Damien finally spoke. But his testimony can protect them now. The doctor nodded quickly. I will testify. I will sign anything. I kept copies. I was afraid Victor would blame me one day, so I kept records. Marco's expression sharpened. Where? A safety deposit box in Evanston. Payment receipts. Voice memos. A letter Victor dictated but never sent. I can get them. Damien's voice was low. You will get them through my lawyers. You will not contact anyone else. You will not warn Victor. Dr. Ellis nodded again, but Evan barely heard it. He had turned toward the window, looking out over the frozen lake. Somewhere in the house, Liam laughed at something Noah said. The sound crossed the hallway and entered the study like light. Evan breathed once, then again. He had wanted truth. He had not known truth could feel like losing the past twice. The revenge began without raised voices. Through his lawyers, Damien sent copies of the evidence to state investigators first, then to federal financial crimes agents who had been circling Victor's shell companies for years without the final key. Victor Hale had protected himself by staying useful to criminals and invisible to law. Damien gave the law a map. Forged medical records. Identity fraud. Kidnapping conspiracy through the fake shelter van. Laundered payments. False accounts opened in Evan's name. Private security footage showing Victor's men entering Damien's archive the night Evan's messages disappeared. Dr. Ellis added his signed statement, the payment receipts, and voice records that turned suspicion into a chain no one could break. By noon the next day, Victor walked into the private conference room above the closed Italian restaurant expecting to meet Damien alone. Instead, the room held lawyers, investigators, Marco, Dr. Ellis, and Evan. Evan had not planned to come. He had told himself revenge belonged to Damien's world, not his. Then Noah had asked whether the bad shelter people were gone forever, and Evan realized fear does not end until it sees the door close. So he came in Damien's car, wearing clean clothes that were still not his, carrying nothing but a folder of copies and 5 years of memory. Victor stopped when he saw him. For half a second, his polished mask cracked. Then he smiled, thin and cold. Evan Miller, he said, as if greeting someone unimportant at an old party. I see survival suited you. Damien took one step forward, but Evan spoke first. Do not say my name like you know what it cost. The room went still. Victor looked mildly amused, but his eyes had sharpened. You were a liability. Evan's hands did not shake. That surprised him. I was pregnant. Exactly. The single word revealed more than any confession could have. Damien's face went empty. Victor seemed to realize too late that he had spoken from instinct instead of strategy. He straightened his cuffs. I protected the Cole name from an unstable Omega who would have chained an empire to sentiment. Evan opened his folder and placed the old clinic intake form on the table. Then the unanswered messages. Then the photograph of Noah and Liam at 3 months old, sleeping beside each other in a cardboard box lined with towels because Evan had not yet been able to afford a crib. He had never shown that picture to anyone. Placing it in front of Victor felt like cutting open a private scar and refusing to hide the blood. These were not sentiment, Evan said. These were children. Victor looked away first. That was the first victory. Damien placed the forged letter beside the photograph. You used my seal. Victor's jaw tightened. You were grieving. You were distracted. You would have destroyed yourself over him. No, Damien said. His voice was quiet, but every person in the room seemed to feel it. You were afraid I would choose them over you. Victor laughed under his breath. And look at you now. One message from a frozen park and you are ready to burn your own structure to the ground. Damien leaned both hands on the table. You are not the structure. You are the rot. Dr. Ellis stepped forward then, small and pale beneath the weight of every file he had carried in secret. Victor's expression changed. It was the first true sign of fear. Ellis, he said carefully. You should not be here. The doctor opened a folder and placed a flash drive on the table. No. I should have been here 5 years ago. Victor's mouth tightened. Anything he says was obtained under intimidation. One of the investigators spoke calmly. Dr. Ellis came through counsel. His statement was recorded before this meeting. So were the payment records from your shell accounts. Marco turned the laptop so the screen faced Victor. A voice recording began to play, low and clear enough to make the entire room colder. Victor's own voice filled the silence, speaking from 5 years in the past, telling Dr. Ellis that Evan Miller was to be guided away, that Damien Cole was not to receive the messages, that the pregnancy, if confirmed, would be handled as a private threat. Evan did not look at Damien during the recording. He could not. He watched Victor instead. The man did not collapse. Men like him rarely did. His control simply tightened until it became brittle. I kept an empire alive, Victor said. Evan answered before Damien could. No. You kept a family apart. The investigators moved then, not dramatically, not violently, just with the calm certainty of people whose paperwork was stronger than his arrogance. One read the charges. Another closed a file. A third displayed a signed warrant on the table. Victor looked at Damien, then at Evan, and for the first time Evan saw fear reach him. Not fear of pain. Fear of losing power in front of the people he had used it to control. As they took him from the room, Victor tried one final time. Those airs will make you weak. Damien looked at the photograph of the twins. No. They are the first reason I have had to be better. The door closed behind Victor with a soft click. No blood. No shouting. No grand punishment. Just silence, handcuffs, frozen accounts, seized records, and the end of a man who had thought paperwork could bury a family forever. Evan stood in that silence until his knees almost failed. Damien noticed. He did not touch him. He only pulled out a chair and stepped back. Evan sat because this time the help had not trapped him. That night, the informant from the park was found at an airport gate with a one-way ticket to Denver and a phone full of deleted photographs. He confessed before midnight. Victor had paid him to watch the fake shelter site, identify desperate Omega parents with children, and alert him if any name connected to Damien appeared. The fake van crew had not been random predators. They had been Victor's cleanup plan. The moment Damien ran to Whitmore Park, Victor knew the boys mattered. The moment the van failed, he tried to sell the confirmation to anyone still loyal to him. By dawn, the chain was broken. The real shelter was notified and protected. The fake website was taken down. The boys' birth records were sealed through legal channels, not erased like criminals but protected like minors who had already survived enough. Evan signed every document himself. Damien stood beside the table and waited for permission before adding his name where the lawyer indicated he could. That mattered. It mattered more than Evan wanted it to. Days passed inside the safe house with the strange slowness of recovery. At first, Evan slept in a chair between Noah and Liam's beds because beds felt too soft to trust. Damien slept outside the hallway, not at Evan's door, not close enough to pressure him, but close enough that the guards knew he would not leave. On the third night, Evan woke from a nightmare with the taste of snow in his mouth. He stepped into the hallway and found Damien sitting on the floor, sleeves rolled to his elbows, reading a children's book under a lamp so dim it barely reached him. Evan stared. "What are you doing?" Damien looked up. "Liam asked me to practice the bear voices. He said mine were bad." Despite himself, Evan blinked. "They are. I know." The honesty was so simple that Evan's anger lost its footing for 1 second. He leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You do not have to sit there every night." Damien closed the book. "I know. Then why do you?" Damien looked at the closed bedroom door. "Because for 5 years, no one came when you needed someone outside the door." Evan swallowed. The hallway blurred. He hated that sentence. He hated how accurately it found him. You cannot repair 5 years by losing sleep. "No," Damien said. "But I can start by not disappearing when it gets uncomfortable." Evan should have walked away. Instead, he slid down the wall and sat across from him, leaving the width of the hallway between them. It was not forgiveness. It was not even trust. It was two exhausted people sitting outside the room where their children slept, letting silence do something gentler than war. Healing came in pieces too small for outsiders to notice. Damien learned Noah counted exits in every room, so he began asking Noah to help check that the windows were locked, turning fear into a job the boy could finish. He learned Liam hated medicine unless Evan called it dragon fire and let him chase it with apple juice. He learned neither twin liked sudden male voices behind them, so the guards began announcing themselves from the doorway before entering any room. Evan learned Damien had no idea how to cook oatmeal without making it resemble wet cement. He learned Damien could run a criminal empire with 3 phones but could not assemble a toy train track without Noah correcting him 6 times. He learned that Liam, who had once hidden behind Evan's coat in the park, would now climb onto Damien's knee with a book and demand a scary bear voice, even though everyone agreed it was terrible. The first time Noah called him Daddy Damien, the room went silent. It happened on a rainy afternoon 2 weeks after Victor's arrest. Noah was building a tower of blocks near the fireplace when it leaned too far left. Damien reached out to steady it but stopped before touching Noah's work. "May I help?" Noah sighed like a very tired adult. "Yes, Daddy Damien, but do not make it too perfect. Castles need personality." Evan froze at the kitchen counter. Damien froze beside the blocks. Noah did not notice. Liam did. He looked from one adult to the other and whispered loudly, "You made them weird." Evan turned away before either boy could see his face. Damien stayed very still for a long time, one hand hovering near the crooked tower, his eyes bright in a way that made him look less like a dangerous man and more like someone being given water after years in the dark. Later that night, Damien found Evan on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching fog move across the lake. "I did not tell him to call me that," he said. Evan did not look at him. "I know. I will not take anything from you." Evan laughed softly, but there was no cruelty in it. "They are not things, Damien. I know that too." The lake was black and still beyond the porch lights. Evan rubbed his thumb over the edge of the blanket. "For 5 years, I was both parents. Good days, bad days, fevers, birthdays, first words, nightmares, everything. I do not know how to stop standing in front of them." Damien's voice was low. "Then do not stop. Let me stand beside you when you are ready." Evan finally looked at him. The porch light caught the silver in Damien's eyes, the same silver Noah carried when he was suspicious and Liam carried when he was stubborn. Evan had spent years seeing Damien in their faces and resenting the ache of it. Now the ache had changed. Not healed. Changed. "I hated you," Evan said. "You should have. I needed you." Damien closed his eyes as if the word struck him physically. "I should have found you before you had to ask strangers for warmth." Evan wanted to keep hurting him with the truth. A part of him still needed that. But another part was tired of living inside the same winter. Do not ask me to forgive you yet. Damien opened his eyes. I will not. Do not buy me things and call it an apology. I will not. Do not turn my sons into heirs before they are children. Damien's answer was immediate. Never. Evan nodded once. It was small. It was not enough for a love story, but it was enough for that night. The first school conversation happened in the kitchen a week later, and somehow it frightened Evan more than Victor had. Noah and Liam were supposed to start kindergarten months ago, but evictions, shelter waitlists, and the constant search for work had turned enrollment forms into another luxury Evan could not hold on to. He had taught them letters with receipts and bus posters. He had taught them numbers by counting coins. He had taught them kindness because no school could do that part for him. Still, when Damien placed a list of private tutors, public school options, and child therapists on the table, Evan felt shame climb his throat before reason could stop it. I know they are behind, he said too quickly. Damien looked up. I did not say that. You did not have to. Evan. Damien pushed the papers away from himself, leaving the table clear between them. Noah reads warning labels faster than most adults read contracts. Liam negotiated 3 extra cookies from Marco yesterday by pretending it was a diplomatic exchange. They are not behind. They survived a world that kept moving the starting line. Evan sat down because standing suddenly felt impossible. Damien continued carefully. They need support, not correction. So do you. Evan looked toward the living room, where Liam was explaining to Noah that stuffed animals had a legal right to blanket access. I do not know how to let strangers help them. Then we do not start with strangers. The next day, a retired kindergarten teacher named Mrs. Alvarez arrived with picture books, colored pencils, and the calm authority of someone who had survived 32 years of 5-year-olds. She did not ask the twins what they lacked. She asked what they loved. Noah said maps. Liam said dragons, frogs, and hot chocolate, in that order. By the end of the first hour, both boys were lying on the rug drawing a map of a dragon city with emergency exits clearly marked because Noah insisted safety planning was important. Evan stood in the doorway, one hand over his mouth. Damien stood several feet away, not beside him yet, but not far either. They are happy, Evan whispered, like it was dangerous to say out loud. Damien watched Liam hold up a green crayon and declare it government-approved dragon fire. They are. I forgot what that looked like when I was not terrified of losing it. Damien did not answer too quickly. He had learned that some truths did not need a bandage made of words. Then we remember slowly, he said. Winter softened slowly into spring. The safe house became less like a fortress and more like a place where children lived. Muddy boots appeared by the side door. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator. A nightlight shaped like a moon glowed in the twins' room because Noah said darkness was less scary when it had a job. Liam planted bean seeds in paper cups and accused Damien of intimidating them when they took too long to grow. Marco became the boys' favorite person for exactly 3 days because he could make paper cranes, then lost the title when he refused to let them keep a frog in his suit pocket. Evan began to sleep in a bed again. Not every night. Not easily. But sometimes he woke to morning instead of fear, and that felt like a miracle too private to name. Damien did not push. He attended therapy because Evan told him power was not the same as emotional intelligence, and for once Damien had the sense not to argue. He worked from the study with the door open unless confidentiality required otherwise. He learned to say, I was wrong, without adding a defense afterward. He learned that apology was not a speech but a pattern. One afternoon in April, the Real Lakeside Family Outreach sent a letter. Not a form letter. A handwritten one from the director, thanking Evan for helping expose the fake site that had been preying on vulnerable families. The organization had recovered its stolen donations, repaired its system, and created an emergency fund in the twins' names for other parents stranded in the cold. Evan read the letter twice, then sat very still at the kitchen table. Damien saw his face and misunderstood. "I can have them change the name." Evan shook his head. "No," his voice was thick. "For one night, I thought asking for help had put my children in danger." He looked down at the letter. "Maybe now it helps someone else get warm." Damien sat across from him, leaving the table between them, and said nothing. He was learning when silence was respect instead of absence. The first visit to Evan's old storage unit came 2 days after the letter. Most of what he owned had been lost during the last eviction, but a church volunteer had paid for 1 month of storage after seeing Evan carry the twins' baby blankets in a trash bag. Damien sent a driver, but Evan insisted on going himself. Damien did not argue. He only asked whether he could come. Evan almost said no. Then he remembered the door codes, the quiet hallway, the way Damien had watched Noah and Liam choose their own cereal for the first time as if it were a holy ceremony. "You can come," Evan said. "But do not make a speech." Damien nodded. No speeches. The storage unit smelled like dust, cardboard, and old rain. Inside were 3 boxes, a broken lamp, a folded stroller with 1 bad wheel, and a plastic bin of baby clothes Evan had not been able to throw away. He opened the bin slowly. Tiny socks. 2 faded yellow onesies. A knit hat from the hospital donation box. At the bottom was a stack of drawings Noah and Liam had made on scrap paper, stick figures with large heads and crooked smiles. One picture showed 3 people under a blue square. Evan remembered it instantly. Noah had called it a house. Liam had colored the roof green because he said roofs deserved to be happy too. Damien stood behind him, silent as promised. Evan picked up the drawing. This was when they were 3. Noah asked why our house kept changing. Damien's face tightened. "What did you tell him?" "That some families were like birds and had to build nests in many trees." Evan laughed softly, without humor. He asked if birds got tired. Damien looked at the drawing for a long time. "Did you?" Evan turned. "Did I what?" "Get tired?" It was such a stupid question and such a devastating one that Evan had to look away. "Every day." Damien took one slow breath. "I am sorry." Evan waited for more. A vow. An explanation. A promise to buy 100 houses. But Damien had learned. He said nothing else. That was when Evan handed him the drawing. "Hold this." Damien held it like it weighed more than any contract he had ever signed. Months later, Evan made his choice in the least dramatic way possible. There was no storm. No enemy at the gate. No desperate confession in a dark room. It happened on an ordinary Sunday morning when Noah burned toast, Liam spilled orange juice, and Damien stood in the kitchen wearing an apron that said "World's Okayest Cook" because the twins had picked it for him. Evan watched Damien kneel to clean the juice from the floor while Liam patted his shoulder and told him accidents were how floors learn patience. Noah asked if they could all stay at the lake house forever. Damien looked at Evan before answering. Evan noticed. That was the moment. Not the apology. Not the revenge. Not the proof. The pause. Damien looked at him because the future now required Evan's consent. Evan set down his coffee and said, "We can stay." Damien went still. The boys cheered. Liam threw his arms around Damien's neck. Noah hugged Evan's waist. Damien did not move toward Evan. He waited, as always now, and Evan crossed the kitchen himself. He rested one hand against Damien's chest, over the place where his heart was beating too fast for such a controlled man. "This is not me forgetting," Evan whispered. Damien covered Evan's hand carefully, giving him time to pull away. "I know. This is me choosing what comes next." Damien's voice broke on the answer. Then I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of next. Their ceremony happened at the lake house in early fall beneath maple trees turning gold and red. There was no press, no syndicate display, no old power pretending to bless what it had failed to protect. The guest list was small. Marco cried and denied it so fiercely that Noah called him suspicious. The nurse who had checked the boys at the penthouse brought homemade pie. Mrs. Alvarez brought a picture book about brave children and stubborn fathers. The director of the real shelter sent flowers and a note that made Evan cry before the vows even began. Noah carried the rings with terrifying seriousness. Liam carried them too, even though no one had assigned him that job, because he said backup was important in family operations. Damien wore a dark suit, but no armor remained in him when Evan walked across the yard with both children holding his hands. His face opened in a way Evan had once dreamed of and then trained himself not to remember. The vows were simple. Evan did not promise that pain had never happened. Damien did not promise that love alone could erase it. Instead, Damien promised truth before pride, presence before power, and family before empire. Evan promised honesty before silence, courage before fear, and a future not built from old wounds. When Damien slipped the ring onto Evan's finger, his hand shook. Liam announced loudly that adults made rings take forever. Noah told him to respect the emotional moment. Evan laughed so hard he cried. Years passed, not perfectly, but fully. The boys grew taller and louder and impossibly hungry. Noah became watchful in a way that turned gentle instead of fearful, always noticing when someone needed a blanket, a snack, or a quiet place to sit. Liam became stubborn enough to terrify grown men and soft enough to cry over injured birds. Damien learned school pickup lines, science fair disasters, and the particular horror of glitter glue. Evan opened a small community art studio funded partly by the emergency shelter program, though he refused to let Damien put his name on the building. Parents came there with children who needed warmth, paper, paint, and somewhere no one asked them to explain why they were tired. Every winter, when the first snow came, Damien watched Evan carefully. He never mentioned the park unless Evan did. Some years Evan wanted to talk. Some years he only stood by the window and let Damien place a blanket around his shoulders. The memory did not vanish. Healing did not make the past beautiful. It made the present stronger than the wound. On the first snowy evening 5 years after Whitmore Park, the lake house glowed with yellow light. Noah and Liam were 10, old enough to argue about everything and young enough to still run when Evan called them inside for dinner. Damien was in the backyard helping them build a birdhouse that leaned badly to the left because Liam insisted straight lines lacked character. Snow gathered in Damien's hair and on the shoulders of his coat. Noah held a hammer with intense concentration. Liam gave instructions no one had requested. Evan stood at the kitchen window with flour on his hands, watching them through the glass. For one moment, the past rose whole and sharp. The bus shelter. The cracked phone. 3% battery. 22 degrees. Noah trying not to complain. Liam whispering that he could not feel his fingers. The message sent into the dark. Evan pressed one hand against the window, and Damien looked up as if he had felt it. Across the yard, through the falling snow, their eyes met. Damien smiled, not the cold smile of the man people once crossed the street to avoid, but the quiet smile of a father with sawdust on his coat and 2 children hanging from his arms. Noah waved. Liam shouted something about architectural vision. Evan laughed, and this time the sound did not break. The memory remained, but it no longer owned the ending. The wrong message had found the right man. The stolen years had not been returned, but the family had been. And inside the warm house by the lake, with soup on the stove, drawings on the walls, and snow falling softly over a world that had once been cruel, Evan finally understood that home was not the place where pain never happened. Home was the place where no one had to survive it alone.